Good evening, everyone. We begin the second hour of the Reid Out tonight with a grim commemoration. Tomorrow will mark 6 months since the January 6th insurrection, the day Donald Trump incited a mob to attack the U.S. seat of government and prevent the peaceful transfer of power. They descended onto our Capitol, hunting for the vice president and the Speaker of the House, intending to capture and assassinate elected officials. They built a gallows and chanted, "Hang Mike Pence." This also means that we are 6 months into a vast Republican undertaking to gaslight the American people into memory holding what went down on that horrible day. A day President Joe Biden has described as the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. We've heard Republicans downplay and even flat out deny the violence that left 5 people dead. We've heard Republicans, including their dear leader himself, turn the rioters into victims and martyrs, even as video showed them beating police. We heard congressional Republicans like Andrew Clyde even describing it as, quote, a normal tourist visit, and then widely reject a bipartisan commission to investigate the attack, only to stonewall the House Select Committee Democrats launched in its place. What has also emerged in these past 6 months is a clearer picture of what happened on January 6th, thanks to the government's video evidence released at the request of NBC News and other news organizations. Some of that new video shows police trying to rotate fresh officers to the front lines of the siege.
Slowly, guys. We're rotating out the front lines. We got a shield line behind you. You go behind me. You, here. Go. You, go. Back up!
Joining me now is Scott McFarland, investigative reporter for NBC4 Washington, Michelle Goldberg, columnist for the New York Times, and Dean Obeidallah, host of the Dean Obeidallah Show on SiriusXM and an MSNBC columnist. Thank you all for being here. And Scott, I want to start with you. You've been going through and pouring through these cases against these insurrectionists, the people who are part of this siege. What are you learning that kind of brings together kind of what we now know about who these people were and why they say they were there?
Hey, Joy, good evening. They're from all walks of life in all parts of the country. But in the last few days, going through the court filings, it's becoming increasingly clear if we're on a journey here legally, we're still closer to the starting line than the finish line. Our latest count is 516 federally charged, accused insurrectionists. There could be hundreds more. By my count, about 2% of the cases, 2%, have gotten to a plea agreement, and just one solitary case has gone to sentencing. So there's a journey still to be made here. But here's the kernel of where the case is right now. There are 3 large groups of defendants, all accused of being parts of far-right groups: the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, and the 3 Percenters. All accused of conspiracy, of the plotting and planning, coming ready for action January 6th. Those cases largely are in their infancy, but the Oath Keepers, that stands out, Joy. The feds have won some early victories and made some progress there. They've secured 3 plea agreements from accused Oath Keepers, all 3 of whom have agreed to help the feds with their investigation, to flip. And the prosecutors, Joy, said there are good plea discussions underway with the rest of them.
And just to be clear, Scott, have we discerned any ties yet to lawmakers? Because we still do have Ali Alexander, who is still missing somewhere out in the world. We don't know that he's been captured that we know of. And he named lawmakers as having been part of it. And we just had lawmakers doing a tour of the border with one of the people who stormed the Capitol, one of the people who's apparently friendly with Marjorie Taylor Greene, a sitting member of Congress. Have any of those connections thus far been made, at least in court?
Here's what we can tell demonstratively. The NBC News team here has read through the thousands of court filings, every one of them. Not one iteration, not one mention of a member of Congress by name or otherwise. But here's what we can tell you. We mentioned the Oath Keepers, that they're flipping, that they're helping the feds. Typically in federal prosecutions, when you have defendants flip, it's because they're going to flip bigger fish. Here's the thing, Joy. Right now, in terms of the charges, the Oath Keepers are the big fish. So the provocative question is, who are they going to turn over, or what are they going to turn over to the prosecutors?
Yeah, indeed. And Michelle, the thing about these groups, the Proud Boys, I would say, stand out particularly as an organization that Washington Post and other reporters have talked about as law enforcement looking the other way when they were around, as having weirdly sort of cozy relationships going into this siege with lawmakers. We've got people in the Oath Keepers that were doing things like providing security for people like Roger Stone, who were around the former president. It's very difficult, other than the 3 percenters, who essentially are just sort of a radical organization. Do you feel that it's inevitable that we're going to have to start talking about elected officials as we talk about these cases?
Well, I think one elected official that we should be talking about right now is Paul Gosar, who did a number of rallies with Ali Alexander, seems to have been quite close to him, is also, we know, close to the white nationalistic Fuentes and is refusing to disavow that association, even though, this isn't sort of nudge, nudge, wink, wink white nationalism. It is unapologetic. Actually far worse than anything that Steve King said, except the center of gravity in the Republican Party has moved so far right that where they would have once expelled Steve King in order to preserve, what they thought was their image, now they've sort of come to accept that people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar are part of their image. And so, yes, I think that, I think it's no secret. Anybody could have seen the rally that preceded this insurrection. They could have seen the people saying, including the President of the United States, we're going to march on the Capitol. I guess the question is whether the coordination went even beyond the already kind of quite shocking level of coordination that we've seen.
Yeah, indeed. And Dean, Benito Mussolini wasn't like physically leading the brown shirts to do their attacks either. And I talked in the previous hour about the fact that we've got to start confronting the uncomfortable F word, fascism, because when you marry political violence to supreme loyalty to one leader and a willingness to attempt to overthrow the government in order to reinstall that person in the defense of one group of Americans, namely white Americans, who this core believes ought to be in charge and on top in whatever the social configuration is, I can't avoid that. You've gone even further than that and talked about the fact that we've got to start talking about terrorism. Because as you've said, this has all the hallmarks of sort of an al-Qaeda-like leadership that, bin Laden wasn't on the planes either.
Look, Joy, first of all, I love that you're not timid about using the word fascism because people have to know what that means. A lot of people just don't know what it means. It's not a common usage term. By explaining it, what it's really about, we understand it's not hyperbolic. The GOP is not a political party. It is a white nationalist movement that's embraced fascism, which means undemocratic means plus violence. That's what we're seeing. Joy, to your other point, Christopher Reid, the FBI director, has testified under oath before Congress. He didn't use the word insurrection. He said this was an act of, quote, domestic terrorism. That's the FBI director. That's the words we should be using. January 6th was an act of domestic terrorism incited by Donald Trump. His supporters who attacked the Capitol are terrorists. It's 2 + 2 = 4 stuff. Like Ashley Babbitt, all those who attacked the Capitol are terrorists because the FBI director has said it was an act of terrorism. Joy, if an Islamic cleric for 2 months after the election said the election was a fraud, stop the steal, I want all my supporters to go to Washington and stop the steal, and those Muslims attacked the Capitol, are you telling me that cleric would not be charged with incitement? Donald Trump would be leading the screaming for that Islamic cleric to be charged. In what nation can a man incite a terrorist attack on our Capitol in front of us, radicalize people for 2 months, and his punishment is he's off Facebook for 2 years and he's playing golf and he's repeating the same lies that radicalized people at his first 2 rallies after January 6th, the last 2 Saturdays in a row, and now he's defending the terrorists. Intellectually, this is very hard for me to understand what's going on in our country right now, that we're not using the term, not just fascist, terrorism. You're either with us or you're with the terrorists. It is that clear.